course, we've been focusing on the pandemic at hand. That is, of course, the message we've been getting from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. It's the number one issue that anyone watching the market or the underlying economy needs to be focusing on. And the trend line continues to show that new daily cases are rising, approaching and hovering around about 40,000 cases here across the country a day. And interestingly, new updates in a reversal out of the White House in regards to the other story we've been following on the FDA's rules and guidelines, pushing for another 2-month monitoring period when it comes to approving these vaccine candidates that are in late-stage trials now. Doing so, of course, would push the approval of those vaccines past Election Day, something that President Trump has noted his displeasure with, also calling that rule change in the White House going along with it a political hit job here. So a lot to discuss on that front, and joining us now to do so is Dr. Annalee Baker, an emergency physician in Miami. And Dr. Baker, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. Just first, I guess your reaction, because we had seen this play out over the last couple of days with the FDA pushing for it, the White House saying, we are not going to let you push the vaccine approval here past the Election Day. We know that would be the timeline. So how do you react to the White House now jumping on board with that, despite the fact that President Trump still seems very disappointed with the move?
Hi, Zach. Thank you for having me today. I have to say I'm not that surprised about what the FDA released. The substance of what they are saying is actually nothing earth-shattering. They are essentially just trying to restore public confidence and assure us that the typical policies and procedures for safety of these types of vaccines are going to be followed. Given the recent rhetoric, I think there's been a decline in the public confidence and the number of people that state that they're willing to take the vaccine if and when it becomes approved. So what the FDA has done here essentially is just state that and reaffirm the commitment that they're going to wait 2 months after the last dose of vaccine was given in order to pick up on any of these safety side effects, any of these, rarer, more serious side effects that might occur from a vaccine. So in my opinion, what the FDA has said is actually quite reassuring.
Yeah, no, it's reassuring when you think about why those guidelines are in place. Of course, President Trump's take that the new FDA rules make it more difficult for them to speed up vaccines for approval before Election Day is true. I mean, I guess that's the point that we're discussing here. Calling it a political hit job is a different discussion, I suppose. But when we talk about what could happen on the debate stage, the next one, we've been monitoring President Trump, of course. The market wants to know how he's doing. Reports out of his medical staff seem to be indicating that he continues to improve. But the question is still there, since Joe Biden said he wouldn't want to debate if President Trump still has the capacity to transmit that on the debate stage. So what's your take on that risk and why it's important to consider when we approach that next debate?
Well, I think the reason why it's important is pretty self-evident. We've got two elderly men in relatively high-risk categories competing for the top office in the country and potentially the most powerful person in the world. So we have to protect them. And it's unfortunate that one of them has already taken a hit in this case. I don't know for sure whether President Trump could still be infectious, and partly that's because we have not been given straight information about exactly when he tested positive, when his symptoms began. And also one thing that we look for to know if someone is still contagious is to see when their last fever was. And we're talking about fever that's not suppressed by Tylenol. We're talking about looking for someone whose respiratory symptoms are improving and someone who doesn't have significant lung damage. So I hope and assume that his doctors and the medical professionals involved in this decision with the debate commission are making the best decisions based on the available data we have. And it seems like the Biden campaign has been pretty rigorous about this in terms of insisting on following the proper scientific safety guidelines and listening to the physicians that are giving them advice and not, succumbing to political pressures.
Yeah, the information that we have gotten about President Trump's treatment on that front was interesting. We saw that he received a drug from Regeneron, an antibody cocktail. Eli Lilly has something similar on that front, and they are seeking FDA emergency use authorization. They gave that update to investors. It's boosting the stock today. In one study looking at Eli Lilly's drug, patients with mild to moderate COVID-19 were given a placebo and that drug, and it showed nearly 1% given Eli Lilly's drug had to be hospitalized versus the 5.8% of patients on placebo. So it seemed to indicate that it's a pretty effective treatment here. How important does that antibody cocktail or the idea of using that drug as a treatment become when we approach the winter months, because they say they could have 1 million doses ready by Q4. So as a doctor, talk to me about the treatment options growing now.
The antibody cocktails are very promising. The initial data that we're hearing is encouraging. The idea with the antibody cocktails is to sort of give you that jump start of that initial immune response, sort of similar to the antibodies that you would have, let's say, if you had prior exposure or if you had a vaccine. So it's something that we give early in the treatment to decrease viral load, increase that early antibody response. It's not so helpful, later on when we know that the disease is more plagued by immune dysfunction and immune dysregulation. So it was a little bit strange to see him get remdesivir and the antibody cocktail, and then in quick succession be given dexamethasone. That's a very unusual cocktail. We haven't seen that given to literally any other patient that we know of across the country ever before. Having said that, I do think the antibody cocktails are promising, but they're very difficult to produce at scale. I read those predictions as well. 1 million doses sounds like a lot, but when you consider the access issues and the ethical issues with distribution, it's going to be very interesting how this plays out, because I don't know, if you think about how an antibody cocktail is produced in the lab and how it requires, this culturing, and it's very resource intensive. It's not the same as mass producing a pill or pharmaceutical in that way. So I don't think that we're going to be seeing this as a treatment that's given widely to Americans across the country. There's going to have to be some very strict guidelines about who is able to get this treatment. And I hope that those guidelines are equitable and that we find a way to do this in a way that's ethical.